This is our first podcast. We have never done this before, so bear with us. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Michelle Irving, and we are going to discuss one of her areas of specialism, which is the gut biome, and one of my areas of interest, which is mental health. So hopefully we're going to merge our perspectives and learn a lot of really interesting stuff about the gut biome, which just seems to be gaining more and more momentum in the media day by day.
Yeah, absolutely. So my interest in this area has come from the gut microbiome and kind of how it is formed. So my speciality is midwifery. So looking at what happens in pregnancy, and the more I've explored it, the more I have realized that this is a huge topic. So I was, my initial sort of training, I was looking at how the microbiome is transferred from the mum to the baby, so that's through normal birth, and then how breastfeeding supports the microbiome in the baby, and then starting to look at, okay, so what does that mean? And then understanding that the microbiome in the early days, in the first few weeks, sort of educates the baby's immune system, so that it gets to understand, the immune system gets to understand what are friendly bacteria and what are unfriendly bacteria, which ones you live with and maybe embrace, and which ones are actually a bit of a threat and you need to destroy. So I was interested in that, and then that takes you on to what happens when that process doesn't go right. So that can be as a consequence of not having a normal vaginal birth, or potentially not being breastfed, but also things like antibiotics, so antibiotics around birth. And suddenly you start to get what they refer to as sort of an altered microbiome. And then that impacts how the immune system works. And then that has, a whole set of implications for how healthy you can be. And then realizing that this isn't just physical health. Okay, so there's a link to the brain, which comes into the mental health topic.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Thank you. It makes me think about my own experience. So I was a C-section birth, and I grew up with fairly severe allergies and asthma. And I found out on some site or podcast a couple of years ago that actually could be a consequence of the non-traditional birthing, having been a C-section baby. So that was fascinating to me. And I suppose one of the opening moments of my interest into the gut biome. So a little sort of fact I learned the other day was that at the embryological stage, so when babies are forming, the gut and the brain actually form from the same types of cells. Okay. So they are very linked. Wow. And then we have one of the main nerves in our body is the vagus nerve. Okay. And that runs very directly between gut and brain. It's not the only nerve, but there's a very clear, and it's what we call a bidirectional pathway. So the gut talks to the brain, but the brain also talks to the gut. Okay. And the microbes that are in the gut, when they're metabolizing the food that we eat, they make all manner of chemicals. One of them is serotonin. Okay. And a lot of serotonin is made in the gut. Maybe 95% is made in the gut, the rest is made in the brain. The researchers in this field don't really understand yet the implications of that. Well, that's really interesting from a mental health perspective, because serotonin, right, correct me if I'm wrong, is our feel-good hormone, isn't it? And you're saying that 90% of that
comes from our guts,
yeah,
and 10% comes from the brain. I mean, that's really quite something. And if you are looking at people from an overall well-being perspective, and if your gut environment isn't healthy, if your tummy isn't happy, then that's going to have a huge impact on your psychological well-being.
Yeah.
And I see that very much in my clients and in interaction day to day. So many people that, you know, we seem to meet day by day now have unhappy tummies, whether that's IBS or an intolerance or whatever, and it absolutely deeply affects their sense of well-being. It really does sit uncomfortably with them physically and mentally and emotionally. And what you're talking about, the serotonin, that could really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think they have, you know, the researchers haven't quite sort of figured out exactly what it means, but certainly you know, there's a group of researchers in Cork in Ireland, and they're looking at sort of the influence of diet on depression and other you know, mental health issues, and certainly finding that if you improve the gut microbiome, then measurably the depression or whatever people are experiencing can be reduced. Yeah, and that's very powerful, isn't it? You know, because that's not a drug. You don't have to, you know, go and get a prescription. That's something you can do as an individual. You know, once you've got that knowledge, you can start, you know, to change your microbiome by changing what you're eating.
Well, and on that note, what are a few of this? Are there simple ways that people can start influencing their gut biome, or is it a dangerous thing to start messing with in case you do you want a load of lay people running around trying to adjust their gut biome?
If you're adjusting your gut biome through normal food, then I don't really see any problem with that. I guess the exception to that would be, you know, have you got somebody who's got, you know, IBS or inflammatory bowel disease, you know, they might need to go and talk to their doctors. But if you're somebody who just has become aware that maybe their diet is not quite optimal, then changing your diet to a more healthy one can only be a good thing. And you know, there are increasing numbers of products on the market, prebiotics, probiotics, but you know, researchers like Tim Spector, you know, he has reservations about them, and he very much advocates get your microbes and the food that they eat from your diet rather than taking supplements, because you know, the supplements are made, you know, the probiotics, you know, they are a preparation that has microbes in it, but they're very specific microbes. So you can take them, but you don't know, is that the microbe you need? Could you be making your microbiome more unbalanced by just taking one type of probiotic? Whereas if you're eating a diet that is rich in prebiotics and probiotics naturally, then you're kind of covering all bases. So again, this group of researchers in Ireland, you know, they're looking at the more diverse your diet, the more diverse your microbiome. And what we know is that health is related to having a diverse microbiome. So that means lots of different types of microbes in your microbiome. And again, Tim Spector talks about eating 30 different types of plant foods in a week.
Right, okay. That's a lot more than I'm doing at the moment.
Well, I started thinking about it. So I was like, oh, wow, 30, that's a lot. So what do we mean by plant foods? So we're talking about all the vegetables you can think of, all the fruits you can think of. Think about nuts. So specifically tree nuts rather than peanuts, which are actually, I think they're a legume instead of a nut, aren't they?
Okay.
Avocados, that's a fruit. Oils, you know, sort of, you know, natural
again, sort of tree oils, so think about olive oils.
So natural sort of non-meat products effectively.
Not to the exclusion of meat, but then they would say that, you know, the meat that we eat, you know, or protein, if we, you know, because it might be fish, they need to be good quality. So, you know, if it is meat, so if it's beef, say, then it needs to be pasture-fed beef, because we've been feeding beef cereal, or feeding cows cereal, which isn't their natural food, but is cheap and grows them quickly. But when we eat their meat, we are sort of responding and reacting to the grains and cereals that they've eaten. So a lot of people find it quite difficult to eat those meats. But actually, if the animals were left to eat just grass, then the meat that we eat would be healthier for us.
So if we look after their gut biome, then that's sort of the ongoing chain products.
So yeah, I was thinking the other day about, okay, this 30, right? How do you get the 30 in? And I was thinking, okay, so you have you know, maybe porridge. So you've got porridge oats. That's one. You might put on this. The other good thing is that things like spices and herbs count. So you have a sprinkle of cinnamon, that counts as one of your 30.
Okay.
So then you might have some.
This is looking more promising.
Yeah, you might have some blueberries.
It's looking less intimidating.
in your porridge. What else might you have? You might have some sliced apple. You could have almond milk. So just in one breakfast, you've had 5 out of the whole 30 that you need over the whole week. And then I was thinking, you know, one of my favorite dishes is like a spaghetti bolognese. So in a bolognese sauce, you're going to start with olive oil, garlic, onion, carrots if you're doing it right, maybe celery, tomatoes, and you've got pepper. You're going to put some pepper in there, as in ground pepper. What else could you put in there? Some herbs. Now you're up to 8, and again, that's just one meal. You know, so in 2 meals, you know, we're kind of getting there.
You're almost 50% there.
Yeah. You know, it's not as hard as it sounds, but it is very much about eating whole foods, eating the whole fruit, eating the whole vegetable, and making things from scratch, which I know for some people will be, you know, maybe something they're not so used to doing.
And I think that's the big challenge of the convenience of our society, isn't it? And there's been so many great advances to make life easier for us, in quotes, and the fallout of some of these things isn't always seen at the time, right? And yes, and this sort of culture of instant food, quick meals and instant meals and all that sort of stuff is possibly not helping us in the long term, and potentially in respect to the gut bacteria, then, you know, potentially really closely linked to our mental health, right? So if we're eating, you know, food that isn't optimal for our guts, and that's making us, you know, our gut less happy, and that can obviously make us less happy, and that can compound the psychological pressures that we're under in life.
And it becomes very circular, doesn't it? So stress, you know, you feeling stressed can negatively impact the health of your microbiome. And if the health of your microbiome is not what it should be, that can then lead you to feel stressed. So it's sort of feeding round and round and round. And I suppose it's, you know, where can you make little breaks in these cycles that we get into? And again, I was listening to another podcast earlier, and I don't see that it would be really any different here, but it was talking about the American food industry and talking about processed food, and saying that 72% of processed foods have added sugar. And the reason that they have added sugar is because it's addictive, and you want to eat it and you want to buy more of it. So thinking about, you know, what makes up the great proportion of your food, and sugar is not good for our microbiome. So you know, thinking, okay, so yeah, on a Monday and a Thursday, I'm having, processed foods, acknowledging that actually that's not feeding your microbiome the food that it wants and needs. Okay, so how can I alter that? And we are creatures that like pleasurable things, aren't we? So to say to people you can only eat fruit and vegetables and whole grains, is going to be a misery for a lot of people. But just thinking about, okay, on a meal by meal basis, what can you do just to put things slightly more in your favor? So can you add an apple and take away, this might sound terrible, I was going to say take away a bun, but that might sound really awful to some people, but try it. Nothing terrible can happen. All that ends up happening is you didn't eat a bun.
Yes, indeed. And I think, you're hitting on small steps, which is always a really good way to start change. People often fall into the trap, in my experience, of trying to change too much too quickly and not addressing the underlying emotional context. So I'm very interested at the moment, following the work of Jonathan Haidt, on the significance of emotions in our decision making. And we like to think that we're rational human beings and that our clever brains can come up with the solutions for us and we'll stick to them through the force of willpower. But we are incredibly emotionally driven. Our emotional wiring is much older than the software trying to govern it. And we invariably fail. So if we try and make too many changes too quickly, which impact the emotional relationship we have with food, which we have a very emotional relationship with typically. So, sweet, sugary foods, highly palatable foods, however they're composed, make us feel good, right? And that's, that's
in the moment.
Yeah, in the moment. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But and from an emotional perspective,
2 hours later,
you're crying in the sink.
Exactly. But that, so, we're talking about sort of this emotional, sort of hold almost over us with food. And again, the researchers are beginning to question whether actually, could it almost be our microbes that are telling us what to eat? So if your food is quite heavily based in sort of carbohydrates, you will have a set of microbes that can kind of thrive on that. Versus if you're somebody that eats a lot of raw fruit and veg, you will have a different microbiome. And what they're querying is that when you get that urge to eat your bun, whatever it is that actually coming from your microbes? Because this is their food source. Now, if we all had an optimal microbiome, they would be the microbes that eat the fruit and the vegetables. They wouldn't be craving or needing these sort of simple sugars. So, sometimes when we're talking to people about, you haven't got any willpower, you need to sort of, break your emotional ties.
Dig deep.
What if it's those trillions of microbes that are in your gut who they have that population has grown in response to the food you eat, and they want to keep having that food. So then starting, I guess, to think about, okay, so how do I get those other microbes into my body that do live off fruit and vegetables? And that's where eating whole fruit, so when you eat and I'm going to say I don't know whether they need to be organic or not. I'm not quite sure of the consequences.
I think the science is out on that, isn't it? There's a lot of studies that sort of
you can see, I suppose if an apple has been subjected to lots of chemical sort of pesticides, has that destroyed some of the bacteria in it? I guess maybe it has. But when you eat whole foods, they do contain bacteria. So what you're doing by eating them is introducing those good bacteria into your gut, and then when you're eating a whole array of fruit and vegetables, the fiber that's in them is where the complex carbs are, and that's what the microbiome that we would aspire to, that's what it lives off. It lives off the fiber. So by starting to shift your diet, you're introducing the bacteria that live on these better foods, and then you're helping to feed them by eating those foods.
So that's why you have fiber in your diet, is it? It's really for the gut biome. That, because I mean, people understand they want fiber in their diet to help them be regular, and that's ultimately the consequence. But what's really happening is you're giving proper nutritional care to your gut biome.
So when we talk about the gut microbiome, we're really referring to the colon, kind of the far end of the large intestine, and that's where the bulk of the microbiome is.
You see, I would have thought it was in the tummy, in the stomach. You see, so that there you go.
Well, and me too. So what happens is that, so the fiber that we eat. So when you eat, whatever, can't think of anything. Porridge, yeah. Goes into your stomach and it gets broken down sort of mechanically, and to an extent it gets broken down with some chemicals, but the digestion of fiber doesn't happen there. That happens much lower down in your intestines. So if you eat processed foods that have simple carbohydrates and simple sugars, that actually does happen higher up, and that the impact of that is that there isn't any food going all the way down to where the microbiome is actually sitting.
Right, I see.
So it then has to find other sources of food, and this is where you end up with things like IBS, because the microbes will actually start to. This is quite graphic.
Viewer discretion.
So we have a sort of a mucus lining that protects the epithelial cells of our gut. So we have this sort of nice mucus lining, and when the microbes have the food that they need, that just stays intact. But when they don't have the food that they need to eat something, and that's got lots of complex carbohydrates in it. So they start to utilize that as a food source. Then you get to the actual sort of the lining of the gut, and then if it goes through that, then you've got sort of an open communication between bacteria and your circulation. So then that is understood to be a part of the disease process.
Okay.
So the processed foods, the sugary foods, they all get dealt with here, and then there's nothing coming through to your microbes lower down. So eat an apple.
Eat an apple, eat a carrot.
Eat a carrot.
Yeah.
How many can we name?
there's not testis on that.
When I'm thinking fibers, for some reason I'm always thinking about celery, because you can really see the fiber. That's definitely fibrous.
Well, I suppose again it comes back to this overall concept of holistic well-being for ourselves, isn't it? And the fact that we think habitually that we can sacrifice, and I'm just as guilty as anybody, this isn't from a place of preaching or anything, but we sacrifice elements of our well-being, whether it's our sleep, for example. That's a very popular one for people to neglect, our nutrition, our physical activity levels, and frankly our mental health, these sort of pillars of well-being. And if you're honest with your analysis of your life, there's normally at least one of them that's definitely on shaky ground, and maybe more of them. And something as, and again, we overlook how, we're so cavalier, we're so lazy with the way that we treat ourselves in certain respects, like with our nutrition, right? We just kind of grab something because it's quick and convenient, and because we've got busy lives and all these things are going on, and we don't stop to think. And that's partly around education. I did home economics at school, right? And I don't remember, I couldn't honestly tell you what the content of that was. Now I've learned a little bit more about nutrition since then, which is a good thing to do. But when you're going through, these are things that, unless you have unless you're, you know, lucky enough to grow up in a family that's very, you know, conscientious about food, and really goes to lengths to understand nutrition, it's very difficult to find yourself with that sort of platform. And so we just end up, you know, spinning on in our lives based on these foundations that, you know, that there's no one's fault that we've ended up in. You know, you don't choose who you're born to, and our parents are always trying to do the best they can with what they have. Everyone is trying to do that. No one's trying to mess up your life. And so, yeah, we sort of find ourselves not aware and not really thinking about the impact of just simple lazy decisions with our nutrition in particular.
And it's, you know, as an emerging field, you know, of knowledge, it is fascinating just to see, you know, new thoughts, new ideas, new theories emerging, and then testing them. And again, something I was reading the other day was looking at populations that lived, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago, and, you know, where we have some human remains that can be explored, and you know, what they have found is that diseases like diabetes didn't exist, and things like MS didn't exist. So then it gets people, you know, the scientists thinking about, so what has changed, what, you know, and what, you know, what is the role of, you know, this emerging, and they're calling it an organ. You know, they're talking about the microbiome, the gut microbiome, as actually being an organ in our body. I think we all thought we knew how many organs we had.
Yeah.
Now it turns out
we've got another one,
which we had no idea about. And an organ, because it performs functions that we can't, which again is fascinating. And I guess that's proof that we have evolved, you know, with these microbes.
We're symbiotic, aren't we? I mean,
absolutely. And we can't live without them. So, you know, as much as we might think, you know, microbes, don't want those in my body.
Get the Dettol out, clean your bacteria.
Yeah, we literally can't live without them. But it is about them being in the right balance. You know, when they're in the right balance, then we're in the right balance. So we're healthy, they're healthy. And you were talking about, you know, these pillars of health, you know, sleep and nutrition and exercise. And they need it too, apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently, gut microbes need sleep.
Yeah. Okay.
And apparently they have a circadian rhythm.
Oh, wow.
Like we do.
Okay.
That's quite mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And then it makes you think about, well, okay, so how does that work for people like shift workers? So, you know, if our natural thing is that, you know, we go to bed at nighttime and sleep, and, you know, our gut microbiome has evolved with us to have that same pattern, then, and you know, we know that shift work can be problematic.
Yeah.
And you think, wow, you know, is that because it comes right back down to your microbiome? And excuse me, you know, we're not meant to be eating in the middle of the night and not eating in the middle of the day, and, you know, getting fractured sleep, and, you know, as somebody who doesn't sleep very well.
We'll work on next time.
Yes, exactly. How do you get your sleep?
We'll talk about sleep.
They literally need rest, and then that then links into ideas of having periods of time in the day when you don't eat. So, you know, some people fast for, you know, set periods of time, but actually having distinct times when you're not eating. So you maybe you have, you know, your breakfast, but then there's 4 hours where you literally don't eat food, and then you have your lunch, and then there's maybe 6 hours, you know, and in those gaps, that's when the microbiome can sort of rest.
Okay.
Whereas, you know, and I don't know if you sort of picked up on this, but a few years ago, there was this idea that we should have lots of little meals.
I was just going to say the very same thing, yes. And I haven't seen that for a little while now, but yes, that was absolutely.
And that would be completely sort of counter to this thinking, is that no, the gut actually needs a rest from having to constantly digest food, even if it's just little bits. So yeah, you know, that links into this idea of compressing, the number of hours where you have a food intake, and then the rest of the time you're having that time off. But again, that I think is all emerging, and I'm sure that is fairly individual. How people respond to that will be based on what their health is now, what their lifestyles are. But just sort of interesting ideas that I'm certainly beginning to play with. And just seeing what different effect do you get. And are my microbes happy? And then exercise. So again, researchers have looked at the impact of exercise
on the gut biome.
On the gut biome, microbiome. So it would appear that in people who exercise, and this is not extreme exercise, this is moderate exercise, that they have a more diverse population of microbes. And again, sort of theory is when you exercise, obviously your blood's moving around your body, you're getting more oxygen in. So is that happening specifically within the gut, and that you're making them healthier and happier because they're getting more blood supply and more nutrients, more oxygen. So take your gut microbiome for a walk.
And again, this shows, we kind of treat the vehicle, or we think of ourselves as a vehicle in which our mind is. We live in our minds, most of us, and we think that that we've got this body which is effectively a car to us that we can do what we want with and service as badly as we want, and it's all okay. But there is absolutely this symbiotic relationship, and there's so much we don't understand. And when we're in the relative primes of our life, it's particularly easy to neglect these things and think it's going to be like this forever.
The human body does seem to be really quite tolerant a lot of the time. A lot of people are getting away with what should be kind of the wrong thing.
Until suddenly they don't.
But it's so.
It does. Sorry. But people do. The body is incredibly resilient, and it does seem to withstand. And you see this in all sorts of ways, in terms of people having physical accidents as well. You can have be in a horrendous physical circumstance and sort of walk away virtually unscathed, or you can slip over and bump your head and it's game over. So there's just it's so interesting. And the same, you get people, and this is what happens, isn't it? You get people who do all the wrong things in quotes, don't they? Whether it's smoking, drinking, eating badly, not exercising, and they'll live to 100 quite happily.
The Churchillian effect, isn't it?
And then you'll get someone who takes their health seriously and tries to do all the right things and has a heart attack at 40. There's always the outliers at both ends of the spectrum, isn't there?
And that sort of complexity of humans and human life, isn't it? That you can never sort of just apply one theory, because there's so much else playing in which we don't understand yet. But I am in a place of utter fascination, and it's sort of it's quite awesome almost that that something that's so key to us, something that maybe we're going to start calling an organ, we didn't really have any great knowledge of, although we were talking yesterday, weren't we, about actually Hippocrates 2000 years ago knew about the gut, and then what happened in the intervening 2000 years, you sort of forgot, or maybe maybe it wasn't such an issue until maybe the Industrial Revolution and when health and food really started to change. But so we have known about it, and then we sort of didn't know about it, and now we're coming back to knowing about it again. And for me, it seems my understanding of what I'm reading and listening to is it really is the seat of our health, and not just our physical health, but our mental health and our physical health. And I guess if you come back to that sort of holistic thinking, of course.
Yeah.
How could it be anything else?
No, absolutely. And that's it is ridiculous what we think we can get away with in life. And and I think, I mean, Dr. Michelle Irving, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. I mean, it's been, and I think it's clear that it's a fascinating topic. It's a fascinating topic. You love it. Yeah. I mean, I love this stuff as well, and that's why I love what I do. It's interesting. It's
just wanting to know more about it, and you know, what does this mean for us as individuals? You know, we're just normal people getting on with our lives. What does it mean? What can we do? But very sort of positive messages that it seems like we can change our microbiome, we can improve our health, and it's down to us, I suppose, to find out more.
Make a decision, take some action, which is easier said than done, but
little steps.
So if people want to connect with you to learn more, what's the best way to connect with you?
So I have a website, and this sort of at the moment is focusing on my midwifery work, so bestbirths.co.uk, but I'm also a trainer about the microbiome in pregnancy and sort of early months of infant life. So come to me through my website.
All right, lovely. And I'll add that to the show notes below. Well, again, thank you so very much. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon. And possibly we'll talk about sleep.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you.